Okay. So, we have had the HM-01 running on this scrap-built base with this old yellow ignition module. I've had questions about it. This is a spare that I picked up a while ago. This is the yellow unit that they sell with the earliest yellow or blue anodized, no model number, hit and miss engine kits that really resemble the ET1/M90, I think, but are the precursor to that. But since I got the Musa official kit in the mail with the skid and box for the mounting base, we're gonna do a few adjustments on the engine and mount it on this base and then test run it again. So this base is really nice. It's, you know, pretty deeply stained. It looks like they cut it, and the stain is pretty in there, so there's a bit of splintered edge there, rough edges on some of these cuts, but I think that if I sand those, it's not like I'm going to sand through the finish, so that's nice. But for now, we'll just get this based. Oh, and there's a giant black magic marker mark on the side of that. Interesting. Well, that's okay. It's dark wood, and that matches, sort of, but also rubbing alcohol will remove that, so I'm gonna see maybe about making that less noticeable, but obviously it's not super noticeable unless somebody points it out. But for starters, the kit came with fuel tank straps and screws, and the engine came with mounting bolts, but this box did not come with screws to mount it on the end of the skid. So I don't know what spacing will look nice with that, but I've got just some screws that I'll use to mount that up when I get to that point. So first things first, get our big 2.5 millimeter driver and remove the engine from this base I made. Put all this over here for now. And okay. Have a rag and wipe all these off. And then I only used 3 screws to hold the engine down on the spare board because the last screw goes in under the push rod here, and I didn't want to deal with putting that in, so and this emergency built board is out of service again. Wipe all this oil up from where I test ran it. There we go. And this casting base has a little oil sump cast into it, so if you wanted to, you could drill a hole through that and put a collection bin underneath here to make sure that it doesn't run out onto the base as much, but it's pretty big already, so as long as you remember to get that cleaned out all the time. Now, check our, yep. Spot here. And fuel tank and ignition box fits like that. Cool. So these do mount only one way, and I'm in the habit of double checking fits before I get started, so and since this base is pre-drilled, you just have to put the screws in and make sure they hit the holes, and then before we tighten them all the way down, we'll make sure they're all in. And I'm gonna just leave them a little loose until I get the ignition set up. Because while the original design of the engine, we've got this grounding flag on the yeah, I've got a grounding flag here. The I would rather hide the ground wire under the corner of the engine and cut that tag off than slide a big ground connection on here. So, and now, yep, just as I suspected, this is directly under there, so I'm gonna have to get a, let's see, how can I get at this screw? I'm going to take the push rod out and see if there's some clearance from that. So, pin, and the push rod untwists from the brass cam following bracket. And that spring comes out of there, and there is an indent in the back side of this to hold the spring. That's why when I pulled the push rod out, it didn't just spring out of there, because there's a tiny indent there that holds one end of the spring, and then the bracket here is enough to hold the other spring in place. So There we go. The ball nose driver is to the rescue. It's just enough to get behind this bracket and into that screw. You can see there. There, now that bolt is most of the way in, there's enough room for this to work with my ball nose driver, so I can put the return spring back in. Alright, I watched, was it Engine Guy's video? Watched a different video on this where he talked about the fit on this drilled out hole not being great. I think mine is pretty good, but I can see how if there was a mismatch of tolerances there, this would be a problem, but I think I don't need to ream that the way that he reamed his out. Alright, that's tight. Put our valve, tap it back in. Alright, unscrewing that didn't do anything, so that's good. That video also spoke about how this latch here doesn't really hold the exhaust valve open very wide, which I do recognize that as a problem, and I will have to pull this out and talk about the geometry of this latch again, because as I've spoken about on the HM-01, the latching here between the latch and this hook part, the geometry of that is a big help in making hit and miss engines latch really strongly and then unlatch again. So I will take a look at that. After I get this mounted and test run again, because we're going to try and slow this down a lot, and I think I do copying that modification here, and then since I got the kit, I have all this spring stock. I can make a much softer spring for the governor, So we're going to do both of those things when we try to get this running slower. But right now we're just getting it mounted on the mounting base kit with the ignition kit. So, alright, that screw is in place so that I can reach it now. Those four are in. We will get out our fuel tank straps. And these have a notch cut on the side of them. I assume that is the bending location for these, so because what we're going to have to do is put a 90-degree bend in them so that they can go up and over the tank. Got my handy forceps here. And both of these have to bend up the same way, and then they will curve around the tank. So we'll put one end in, and those are 2mm cap head, or 2mm sockets in the head there. Again, nice and loose there. .90-degree bend like that. Alright, now fuel tank. It's got a center bung on it for the fuel to go out, but it's got an offset filler, and I think that I'm gonna want my filler to be on the same side as, well, let's think about this. The ignition is going to be wire coming out here. I'm going to want my filler to be on the opposite side because this cap can come out, but none of the valve gear will poke past it, but the wire might come out and make a big loop over the top of that cap on this side. So bend down and around. It's all springy, so we're going to hold the tip of that in. There. Held that all together and got it in the hole, and now I can get it kind of in the hole, leave it loose. Same with this side, we're bending it and letting it spring, and that way as we tighten it, it'll stay. It'll clamp better. If we overbend it before we get it tightened in place, it'll develop a loose spot or it might crimp. And then it'll look weird. There. Alright. I think that's square. Now adjust it. Nice and even from side to side. There we go. Use the cracks in the end fittings there to make sure it was centered on the skid. Alright, that's the back side, and then there. That's firmly in place. Now I'm going to take the old... Alright, grabbed my 4-way screwdriver that also is a socket for these spark plugs. Since this is a regular plug that was in my stash of extra plugs, and a plug did come with this new ignition unit, I'm going to put the plug I was using back in the stash, set the spare ignition unit I was using in the back in the stash. Open up the new ignition unit. Let's see. They use this for a lot of engines because here's a hall sensor harness, but that isn't needed since the trigger on the HM-01 is already connected. Here is a battery harness for a battery box, whatever you choose to use, but I have multiple battery boxes here. So, and then this unit, oh, this unit is interesting. Most of them are sealed. This one has a big tab on it that pops open, so you can look inside and see where it was potted. Cool. Anyhow, we'll close that back up and make sure that we get all the wires coming out the sides correctly, and just close that. Well, if this goes bad, you can open it up and look inside to see which of those components is cooked. They are all potted in there, so it's not like they will be easy to replace, but a different style of spark plug boot. I got a black one and a clear one. I'll use the clear one for now since I don't have this plug wire stripped, so I'll want to be able to see if it flashes through to the plug. And then open this box. It's another branded quarter 32 plug. This is let's see here. It's got a longer shoulder between the hex head and the sealing area than the PK brand plugs. Got a little shorter electrode in there. And the insulation section is roughly the same length. I got a slightly different shape on these insulation parts, so it's not completely unique, but it's a different enough plug from those that I wonder if it comes out of the same factory. So we'll put that on there. And then I've got a grounding ring already on there. And the trigger wires around here will plug in. And then we'll put the batteries on. Not getting a spark. Let's see. Wonder if these batteries are bad. Okay. Grab a different set of batteries and see what happens. If it doesn't work, I'll have to go find a meter and test these. Interesting. Oh, it's... That's not promising. Well, I'm gonna... Because this end isn't stripped off, so I don't know if it's... I'll take the plug out and see if it just sparks to the ground. Nope. Nothing. This does say it's a 6-volt unit though, so maybe I need more juice. I know that a lot of these units work on lower voltage, but this does say 6-volt input, so we will have to go find a battery box to get 6 volts. Alright, I tried one more thing. These are rechargeable lithium-ion AA replacement batteries, and they have the voltage circuitry to make them 1.5 volts. at high current. So these are definitely 4.5 volts, and they're enough to get our spark. So this is my old batteries must just be low, and so they're good enough for a 4.5 volt unit, but these the big 6 volt requirement on this the Musa unit. Yep. Alright. Got spark. Now see where our our ignition is still like 10 degrees before top dead center, which is a bit much. So let's see, how do I get that to change? Okay. Unplug that and take this ring off of there, move that over. Put all this away in the extra parts jar. To get a earlier ignition, we got to move this. There's the two contacts in here. We got to move the back contact forward so it touches sooner. So tiniest bit of pressure on there is probably enough. So we'll loop our ground wire on there again, plug in the wiring harness. Ignition unit. Oh wait, I bent that the wrong way. Duh. Needs to go further away so it doesn't touch as soon. Well, that's easier. There. Tiny bit of pressure the other direction, the direction it should go. Alright, still a bit. Alright, a little more pressure to open that. There we go, we're closer to 5. Yep. So the timing changed from about here, which is what, 15 degrees or something, to just about here, which is between 10 and 5 degrees. So I'm gonna push on this tab just a little bit more. Are these contacts not touching now? That is correct. They're not touching anymore. Okay, so what can we do about that? An interesting dilemma. Oh. Oh. All right, we will work with between 5 and 10 degrees advancement on the ignition, if that's the way that it's the furthest, if that's the smallest amount of advancement I can get. Alright, we're back to having a spark. So we'll take that, it's the smallest amount of advancement I can get out of the exact current setup. If I need this to be closer to top dead center or even retard the timing a bit to make it run a little bit slower or better, then I'm going to have to modify this ignition trigger zone a lot more than I'm comfortable with doing right away. So we'll just leave it at that for now and see what happens. Alright, so this ignition module works, the plug works, it's got a very fine copper washer on it, so I think I'm going to be comfortable putting that in there. Remember, the other copper washer I had stuck out off the outsides of the plug, and I was worried it was interfering with the ability for the plug to seal in there, but that seems to be in good shape, so we'll just consider that working and tested, and see about mounting our box on the end of the skid here. I'll mount it this way so that the lid opens toward the engine. That way you'll remember to shut it before you turn it on, hopefully. And I think I want it to be a little inboard like that, but it needs to be so that it can open. So that's about as far inboard as it gets, so that there's a bit of skid showing out there. Alright. And I have a pencil, so I'm just gonna eyeball this to make it look straight and pencil mark along there. And we'll turn it around. And then I'll turn this around and look at it from the other side. See if it looks... Yeah, that looks pretty nice. When you're eyeballing something straight, it's very handy if you can look at it from both sides. Now, center it up. Interesting. Well, alright, so there's a choice to be made. We look at this, we'll see that we can center the box on the skid here so that it's even on this side and even on that side. But when we do that, the edge of the box is in the middle of the flywheel and the edge of the box is on the edge of this flywheel. Because these flywheels aren't evenly spaced. So when you run into an issue like this, always look and make sure that you are centering on your main base here, because even if this looks odd, the main base is the part that should have the final say on what's centered. At least that's a quick guideline on that. But since I've got it like so, I'm gonna let me see, is this latch in the middle? Alright, that latch is more or less centered. I marked the edge of my skids. Okay, there, that's more like it. Yeah, all right. And nice thing about pencil is when you're really careful with it and light with it, it'll erase right off of here. So I've got that marked. Now I need to drill and mount this with my spare screws. And what size were these again? .3/32 is what I'm gonna call this, and since it's inside this box, they don't have to be evenly spaced because they're going to be underneath everything. But we'll start with line this up with one. And then once we got the first one in, put them in, put the second one in. So if you try to drill all your holes at once, you get one out of whack, and then you go to put the screws in, and you'll start having more and more alignment errors. So first one in nice and snug, readjust everything. Second one. There we go. And then we can put the other two in. The other thing is these screws I got are kind of shallow, which is why I'm using 4. If I had screws that were slightly longer, I would probably just do 2 and not worry about it, because they don't have to be super strong to hold this box down, but since they're very shallow, I don't want to rely on only like a couple threads from each of these to be doing all of the work. There. One solid little box. And then it's going to need to have a pretty big hole to get all the wires out of it. How does this... As you can see, this ignition module is definitely too tall for that. But this battery box fits like so. Ignition module, battery box, yep, that'll all tuck in there. Okay. This is the electric pulse igniter. Should work good though. Anyhow, I'm gonna drill a hole in the bottom back here to run wires down, and then we'll have to plan to route wires underneath here. So there. Well, actually, drill a pair of holes instead of one massive one. So there. Oh yeah, those broke out real bad on the inside. Oops. And see that? I should have taken this off and drilled it against something. Well, I'm going to take a minute and clean up all my sawdust here.